Hey up everyone, and welcome back to Combat Mission Black Sea, Poking the Bear for the After Action Report. In retrospect, I think that while Poking the Bear sums this mission up pretty well, in a lot of ways, Where Are My Warthogs sums it up a little bit better. There's a lot going on in this mission, and I made plenty of mistakes, but what's going on a level up from my command position, what's driving the mission setup beyond my control, and decisions made far from the battlefield in time and space, all feel like they've had a disproportionate impact. And of course this all falls into my personal biases, my viewpoint, and the actual game mechanics. So first of all, we have the actual mission. In a nutshell, go into this valley, destroy or suppress Russian air defences, and then direct close air support to destroy transiting enemy forces. Okay, but we've got a map border problem here. Obviously, both for gameplay and performance purposes, the map has to be limited in size, but part of the problem here is that the scale of this mission, in my opinion at least, demands more space. The terrain in this corner of the Ukraine, essentially in between Bielotservka and the River Dnieper, is basically a big plateau with valleys like this one carved into it here and there, so there's a strong argument that the confines of a valley like this is the best place to hit something like a motor rifle brigade. But at the same time, these valleys are quite long, and in a lot of ways my personal approach to this mission might have been a series of OPs spread for maybe 10 kilometers along the valley sides, with the corresponding increase in engagement area for the close air support. In fact, during the Cold War, this exact kind of mission was set to be carried out by tiny special forces and forward observer stay-behind teams who would basically let themselves get overrun by Soviet forces and then send intelligence back and coordinate air, artillery and tactical nuclear strikes. On top of this, there's the outside context of the mission. The harrying of such a major chunk of enemy combat power as a brigade is going to be taking place over a large area, and I think what happens in one small valley along the route, even if it is the best possible choke point, is going to be bookended by attrition before the enemy reaches the map and after he's gone. Even if we start factoring the whole wider context of the air-to-air battle, air defense, deception, and all that stuff, what goes on in a 2x1.5 kilometer map, I think it is really a very small component of the whole thing. But like I say, the game has to run into the limits of scale somewhere, and the mission concept isn't exactly off the mark. It's certainly one way to approach this problem. And this feeds into my second point about the mission and one of my pet peeves about scenarios, which is that I simply would never have brought along the force I was handed for this mission if I'd had a choice. Essentially, although the two ground OPs were useful, I tackled this mission with drone observation, artillery and air support. This is the main reason why the video of the battle was so short. Except for dealing with Ivan's probing of my little corner, I basically spent my time using an air controller, my JTAC, who actually never made it up to the hill OP and survived the whole thing, and a couple of other observers and HQ elements to direct off-map support. In a very real sense, I could probably have directed this mission in total safety from a bunker hundreds of miles away and never had a pixel trip and set foot on the battlefield itself. Of course, the game doesn't work like that, and it makes sense on plenty of levels to have some ground observation and direction, but in the end, the force I had consisted of a mix of scouts and snipers in Humvees and Bradleys, a striker infantry platoon, 2 mobile gun system strikers, 2 ATGM strikers, and 2 M113s with 120mm mortars, along with a collection of HQ and observer elements in very light vehicles. So in my opinion, it was too light to fight, and too heavy to be sneaky. In fact, you could probably argue that most of my losses were avoidable, because I ended up trying to use things because I had them. The 2 striker ATGM vehicles, for instance, they were going to be no good defending the reverse slope of my corner because of the 200 meter minimum range of their tow missiles so severely limited their possible positions and their usefulness against tanks at close range. But trying to use them to fire across the valley at the motor rifle brigade was suicide because there weren't any good hull down positions, and the long flight time of the missiles combined with the black blast giving the firer's position away is pretty much a recipe for disaster. In short, I would never have brought them along. Something similar happened with the hill OP. I had a scout section and a sniper section and couldn't think of any better places to stick them than up there, where a big blob of heat signatures pretty much gave the game away and got them all killed. And at least to some extent, probably more than I'm willing to admit, the mission and the force selection here had a bit of a blue screen of death effect on me. It's certainly not the first time in a scenario where I've decided what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, before sidelining parts of my force that I don't see much of a use for. And you can see this in the actual video where I talk about pushing out of my corner and establishing a bigger defensive perimeter so I had some depth to work with defensively, and then simply not doing that even after getting some reinforcements, which would have made it a bit more practical. Would it have had much of an impact on the result? Maybe, maybe not. But if Ivan had pushed into my corner with any strength and commitment, then I would have gotten punished for the choices that I made either way. The last point about the force selection here is on the air power side, and again it feeds back into the overall mission concept being a little beyond the scope of combat mission. The quick version is that some wild weasels or other airborne suppression of enemy air defense assets would have been really handy here. These are aircraft equipped with anti-radiation missiles which lock onto and home into air defense radars, and it would have been sensible, if it were an option, to have an airborne SEAD pass to really pinpoint and nail all those AA and SAM vehicles before calling in the main body of the airstrikes. But there are no SEAD loadouts in Combat Mission Black Sea. I assume it falls under Battlefront's heading of beyond the scope of the average combat mission game, which is fair enough. And this leads neatly onto the last aspect of this mission that myself, the mission maker, and to a large extent Battlefront themselves, didn't have much control over, which is to do with the technical aspects of the close air support here. This one goes way back to decisions in the Pentagon and beyond. You might have guessed it already, but I would have much preferred to have some tank-killing A-10 Warthogs here rather than the F-16s and F-15s that I had. It's all very good for people to focus on precision-guided munitions and multi-role platforms and, oh, massed armour is just a threat from the past, we don't need desiccated close air support aircraft. But as with all strategy, it's a two-way street, and if you cut down on your ability to deal with massed armour, then your opponent is going to consider it an option. As for the F-16s and F-15s here, they were armed with a mixture of Maverick air-to-surface missiles which can kill precisely one tank each, and 500 and 2,000 pound laser-guided bombs. Obviously they were successful enough because despite my misgivings this was still a total victory, but certainly laser-guided munitions here require both altitude and loitering time for the aircraft to laze the target, which exposed them to the SAM threat for longer and generally slowed down the engagement cycle. From an armchair Air Force tactics point of view, because I don't know a lot about air tactics, in my opinion it'd probably been better for the aircraft to come in low over the edge of the valley and dump out something like a load of cluster bombs in the second or two that they're actually vulnerable. If you want an example of what I mean, then just look at San Carlos water during the Falklands War. Now, things like cluster bombs are banned or at least restricted these days by international treaty due to humanitarian concerns over unexploded bomblets becoming legacy munitions, etc., and causing civilian casualties down the line, but I wouldn't expect anyone to ignore such an effective weapon if a full-scale conventional conflict broke out. In particular, I think there was an anti-armor cluster bomb in the development somewhere where the individual bomblets had some limited guidance and would specifically target the top armor of things like tanks with shaped charge warheads, which is absolutely insane and unfair and unbalanced, and I'll have a warehouse full of those for my close air support, please. Along similar lines, there's the old FASCAM artillery deployable minefield, which would have been incredibly useful here, but again, unfortunately, not an option in Combat Mission Black Sea. So, in my opinion, some less discriminate weapons here would have been much more useful than precision-guided ones. Finally, there is the actual air support mechanic in combat mission games, which involves specifying a circular area up to about 700 meters across as the area you want to call CAS into. In these circumstances, I would rather have said something like, I'm on this side of the river, everybody else is on the other side, bomb everything on that side of the valley until you run out of bombs, to avoid these annoying moments when enemy forces just slip out of the engagement area, and to let the pilots do important things like prioritize SAMs on their own initiative. So overall, quite a lot of stuff in this mission that was beyond my control, which I suppose is what's sort of prejudicing me against it, because it's really not a bad mission. Certainly not the kind of thing you see in the quick battles, and ultimately I got a solid victory out of it. It's just leaving a sour taste in my mouth for some reason. But all that aside, what did I do wrong here? What did I do right? Fundamentally, the plan to spot and destroy the AA batteries with precision artillery was very successful, with the exception of the 2 Apache gunships, who I should never have called in before the AA threat was gone. I only lost 1 close air support aircraft. And essentially, Using the incoming aircraft to provoke Russian anti-air into revealing its positions was a risk that paid off, especially given the time pressure once the first transiting battalion arrived. The actual targeting of the AA assets, concentrating on one at a time and throwing all the precision artillery at them I could, was maybe not the best idea, again given the time pressure. But with the accuracy of the precision missions, I'm not sure that splitting the effort between targets would have been much faster. The real missing information here is how much damage near misses were doing to the Tunguskas and the Strehlers. If near misses were injuring crewmen, knocking out radars, damaging fire control systems, etc., then spreading the missions around would have made more sense than concentrating, but obviously at the time and now it's impossible to judge. The last aspect of the artillery is the fact that I could have brought it to bear on the transiting force earlier. I judged at the time that it wasn't going to be worth dropping artillery on moving armoured targets, but eventually I realised that I didn't really have anything else to drop it on, and that by cratering some of the choke points I could slow Ivan down, making him spend more time in the CAS engagement areas, that actually there was a lot of comparatively soft-skinned stuff out there like BMPs and trucks that were very vulnerable to near misses from 155mm shells, and that every little bit of obstruction or chaos on the route was going to benefit me in the long run. As for the hill observation point, I've already kind of indicated that it would have benefited from having fewer bodies in it. It would also have benefited from more AT-4s among the scout and sniper teams, and a mutually supporting position covering the open field that was facing the enemy, the field that the tanks used to get up close. But the reality here is that I really wasn't expecting a shock attack by a tank platoon up there. I'd written off that avenue of approach as being unsuitable for armour due to basically being a big channel bounded by woodland. It's an ambush alley. I'd never send tanks in there unsupported. I'd make sure I had infantry there as well, and that would slow the process down a lot. I would have expected the AI here to be doing something similar, and I'd have plenty of early warning. So that was a miscalculation on my part. Just because I wouldn't send forces somewhere doesn't mean that the enemy won't. Ultimately though, it didn't matter very much. By the time I'd gotten the OP up there, I was already hitting the AA. In fact, the other OP on my right was far more useful, despite the fact that it was totally unplanned and basically blind luck that XO hopped out of a Humvee, spotted some AA almost straight away. Finally, we've got the big question of whether or not it was a good move to avoid pushing out of my corner and engaging the Russian security screen. And I'm still fairly 50-50 on this. On the one hand, I would have gained more depth to work with, I would have had better early warning of enemy attacks, and maybe even had more opportunities to engage the passing motor rifle battalion with javelins and tow missiles. On the other hand, moving off the reverse slope onto the forward slope here would expose my troops to the enemy's full weight of fire, which probably wouldn't have ended well. I could have got entangled in the security screen even though it was mostly light troops, and that would slow me down and divert my attention. And to some extent, securing my perimeter could be seen as a risky distraction from the main objectives, for which all I needed was a collection of observers. In the end analysis, I think that even if Ivan had completely overrun my entire position with overwhelming force, if I was able to get my JTAC, my air controller and some other observers into hiding in the woods, especially the woods on the hill, and kept them moving, stayed ahead of Ivan's infantry, stayed away from areas that his vehicles could use to get at me, I could still have been able to call in the CAS via the drone, and that was all I needed to do to complete my mission objectives here. Like I said at the beginning, I didn't really need to turn up for this one. Anyway, bitching aside, I really did enjoy this one. I've never been confronted by an entire motor rifle brigade before, and despite being more personally inclined to refight the Battle of Kursk than use this joint fires thing, it was a good mission. The next mission is going to be really interesting. It's a defense of an urban area with a big twist. One of the US Army's big force multipliers is missing, so I'm really looking forward to that one. Hope you enjoyed this, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.